This is the limitless Keith Lee.
This is Brody King.
This is Angel Garza.
Will Ospreay.
Hornswoggle.
Pentagon Jr.
The Mexican Ray Phoenix.
King Ricochet.
Concrete Rose, Sunny Kiss.
And I'm here to ask you to stop what you're doing, take just one moment, and bask in the glory of the Busted Wide Open.
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 Boston Wide Open.
Busted wide open. Thank you.
You're listening to the Busted Wide Open podcast, dropping the elbow on the hottest topics in sports entertainment and the world of professional wrestling. With your hosts, Nick Howell and Sir Ian Dangerous. Coming to you from the Orbital Jigsaw Network Arena in sunny Southern California. Welcome everybody to Nope, this is not BWO Live. This is for the patrons. This is your patron bonus episode for August 2021. My name is Nick Howell.
And I am Sir Ian Dangerous. And yes, welcome to the show. This is actually a patron bonus episode. Nick, good morning, sir. How are you today?
I'm much better than I was last night at 1 o'clock in the morning when we were finishing up the show.
Excellent. Welcome to the rest of the world. We're here to do a bonus episode. That's right. It's a bonus episode for August. We're sorry it's a little bit late, but here it is. It's going to be a good one. We have a lot to talk about, and especially we wanted to get this out before tomorrow, which is All Out, which is the first time that a certain somebody's having a match in 7 years. Because Nick, today, this bonus-ode, I like that.
I like that actually.
This bonus episode is going to be
BWO bonus-ode.
Damien Priest. Whoa,
no,
what?
It's not.
What are you
no,
doing?
that wasn't Damien Priest.
Oh, was it Satan?
That was just Satan. Yeah.
Oh, it was just Satan. Oh,
that was
okay.
Beelzebub.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Okay. That's much less exciting.
Right.
But yeah, so we're doing this bonus episode today on one CM Punk. And I know that for some of you, you're probably sitting there going, oh, I've heard enough about CM Punk. And for some of you, you're like, oh? And the reason we're doing it is because I've had so many conversations in the last couple of weeks since CM Punk returned. Then a lot of them were, yeah, I'm excited that CM Punk's back, but I don't really know who he is. And it's because he's been gone for 7 years. And even before that, if you started watching 10 years ago, you only caught 3 years of CM Punk at arguably like kind of the downhill on the back end of his career as things were starting to fall apart. Like right at he was at the top, and then it was just starting to kind of come down. So
here's the interesting part. I fit into that conversation, that demo that you just described. That's the thing that's going to make this interesting today, is because I missed it. I came back when I moved back to Raleigh in 2011. Sheriff McDonald, as you guys affectionately know him, my friend Jared, was like, "Hey, all the wrestling's on Hulu now." I was like, "Oh." And that was kind of that was pre WWE Network. So I went through and I remember binging Raw and SmackDown and catching up. And this was the era of Super Cena. And it was during that time frame. And I remember watching it and I was like, who's the CM Punk guy? Why is he so important? And it's interesting that we've gotten to this point where he has become this icon, this figure. And I look back on it somewhat affectionately, but also somewhat confused, because I come from the era of The Rock and Stone Cold. And I'm looking at CM Punk going, he's not them.
No.
Why do people care so much?
And that's what the show today is about. The show today is what the funk is up with CM Punk, basically.
Yeah.
What it's the state of the punk. We want the punk. Gotta have that punk. Oh, we want. Right. That's what we're doing today. If you don't know who CM Punk is, you're gonna know a lot more after the show today. And we're also gonna have a pretty serious discussion. And try and be as arbitrary as possible. We want to talk about why CM Punk.
Yeah.
What is the deal with CM Punk? Why are people so invested in him? Why is he such a figurehead in wrestling? And is he still? Does he still matter? Is this going to be going forward? Because that's a topic of discussion right now too, amongst wrestling people. Is does it matter that CM Punk came back right now? Is that a big deal or not? And obviously, like, it's a big deal to some people, but why is it a big deal to people that maybe don't have the emotional connection to CM Punk, and are seeing all of this outpouring of emotion when he returns and going, what's up with that? I should be excited, I think, but I don't know why. We'll try and explain why people are excited, and you can determine for yourself whether or not you want to be excited about this guy coming back, because, again, he is a very polarizing figure. He can be a very polarizing figure. And he's someone who I would also argue is not for everyone.
True.
He's certainly for a lot of people, but he's not for everyone. And I want to explain why that is. So it's going to be a show basically all about CM Punk. And hopefully at the end of this, even if you think you know a lot about CM Punk, hopefully there's some new information or some new thought processes or some new questions you have about the guy going forward. And I think that's really the point that we're trying to do today on the show. So
I'm looking forward to this myself.
It's more time.
Yeah. Like when we first conceptualized this, it was kind of at the angle of it's relevant. It's the timing is right, but I have no real contribution to this other than, oh yeah, I remember that. Right. So I mean, in a way, I remember this. To me, this harkens back to the Firefly Funhouse match breakdown that you did last year. You have gone out and done a massive amount of research, and have lived through a lot of this yourself, and put this together as sort of a 1 hour cliff notes of.
Well, dear God, I hope it's not an hour of just me talking about his history. I'm gonna try and keep it more brief than that, but it is gonna be kind of a walk down the career of CM Punk. With some notes as far as important stuff and explaining why the pipe bomb, which I'm sure everyone's heard of, even if they don't know what it is or why it is or what happened. I'll try and explain why that was important, why it's such a watershed moment. I want to kind of run down that, and then at the back half of this show, I really do want to be a conversation about why should we care about CM Punk, right?
Yeah.
Who is he?
Especially now.
Right. Why is he relevant? Why do people are attached to him? So I really do want to kind of discuss that. And then, for people, like I said, who may know him, who may not know, who may have become wrestling fans since his time, who've heard the CM Punk chant, and they're like, who the hell is this guy?
Yeah.
Right. So, yeah, it feels like it's appropriate to put this out the day before the big show. So before we get into this, I see you, DJ Tin Man, over in the chat with 100 bits. Thank you very much, brother. He said, very excited for this. Me too, dude. Me too. I've been working this up for a few days, so I'm psyched to do this.
Jesse O'Connor for 100 bits too said just popping in while at work. Thank you very much.
Yo,
Jesse. It's good to see you again.
Thank you very much. So let's start with the absolute basics. What's CM Punk's real name? Do you remember what his real name is, Nick?
Yeah, Phil Brooks.
Philip Jack Brooks with 2 L's with Philip. Philip Jack Brooks. He's 42 years old. He's born. His birthday's coming up. October 26th, 1978 was his birthday.
That's pretty cool. I'm October 30th, 77.
Oh yeah,
that's pretty cool.
A lot of October birthdays around this show. A very important fact about him is he's from Chicago. In case you hadn't noticed by the rapturous reaction he gets in Chicago. He was actually raised in a suburb of Chicago. Another very informative thing about his early life, he had an alcoholic father, apparently just a mess of a father. He was an engineer. His mother was bipolar, and apparently it was a bit of a mess. He's got 5 siblings, 5 of them. And the other major point to remember about him is that he is straight edge. Very, very straight edge. It's one of the biggest defining factors, and that's what the X is on the back of the hands is. If you know anything about straight edge society, the X's are a big thing. It was there's rumors as where the X's came from. One of the
you were a bouncer. You know where they come from.
One of the rumors. I mean, it's like tapping. So you cheers to somebody, you tap it on the bar. There's a lot of apocryphal.
It's the marks they would make on your hand when you were underage at a club you couldn't drink, so the bartenders would know, right?
It's the mark at a club that says you can't drink.
Right. That's what I always thought they were.
And it did start with the music scene. The straight edge culture did start with a music scene.
Yeah.
And so he found that at a young age, and because of looking at his father and seeing that his father was this mess, he decided that he was going to form a lot of himself around the concept of being straight edge and having a willpower to not engage in those things, to drugs, alcohol, etc. And he's been more or less clean since. I think he said one time I had a sip of beer, but
Some asshole, he did a dive into the crowd last night on Rampage, and some guy offered him a drink, and he looked at him like, are you crazy?
I was like, no, look.
Do you know who I am? I am
forgot
straight
to mention
edge.
that on the show last night. And the guy's like, yeah, I want to have my beer. And he just goes, Really did? Have you been paying
Do I look
attention?
like Hangman Adam Page?
Yeah, that's probably what it was. But anyway, so that's he's very much that's part of his personality, is part of his I guess allure, but also it speaks a lot to his character.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that he glommed onto at a very young age and has stuck with ever since.
And
it's partly
respect for
because
that. I mean, I people
Sure.
that stick to their ideals like that, I have a lot of respect for.
And that's something that's going to be a theme when we talk about him is finding an ideal and sticking to it, even at his own expense. And if you watch a lot of recent interviews with him where he's a little bit more older and more reflective on his younger, wilder self, one thing you see a lot is him going, yeah, I did that because I thought it was right at the time. And, I always kind of stick to what I think is right, even if it destroys me as a result. And he's kind of laughs at himself, that is definitely something that is very much part of who he is. And it's one of the reasons I think people attach to him is he's someone who's very confident in their beliefs and will do what they think is right, regardless of the consequences. That's a trope in stories for years and years and years.
Yeah.
Right. Like that people love that kind of reckless hero.
Drive that car off the cliff. Let's go.
If you think you're doing it for the right reasons and you can,
Yep.
make us believe in your reasons, then yeah, we'll go with you off that cliff, Thelma and Louise. So yeah, he started off in Lunatic Wrestling Federation out in Mokina, Illinois. And he started his first wrestling match he had because someone didn't show up for the card. And he ended up being in a tag team with a guy named Chick Magnet Venom. And they formed a tag team called the Chick Magnets. You may see where this is going already.
Yeah.
Because Chick Magnet, CM, they started calling themselves CM Venom, CM Punk. And that's where that came from. Now, that didn't come out until about 3 or 4 years ago that's what CM stood for. And actually, for the rest of his career, people would ask him, what does the CM stand for? And he would always find new things that it was for. Because it was never really for anything, it's for whatever you want it to be. That's essentially. It was originally meaning Chick Magnet for this gimmick, but he's had it mean Cookie Monster. He's had it mean Chuck Mosley. He's had it mean Chicago Maid. Charlie Murphy. Like, he's had it mean all kinds of silly things that he'll just say when people ask him that. So if you're wondering what CM Punk stands for, now you know.
Yeah. Thanks, court case.
Oh, we'll get to that because that's where he met Colt Cabana, was at the Steel Dominion Wrestling School, where he was trained by Ace Steel, who he would tag with for years afterwards. And actually, I think even recently he came to, like, when he wasn't, quote unquote, wasn't wrestling, he did like a little appearance that, in a mask to help Ace Steel. And Danny Dominion. And that same school, by the way, that Adam Pearce went to was where he was trained. There you go. And he and Cabana would be friends for pretty much the rest of their careers. They trained together, they tagged together, or they were opponents. And Ace Steel still says, Punk's one of his top students. Obviously, you're going to say that. Definitely the biggest, most successful student he ever had. And then Punk went over to IWA Mid-South, and already he was getting success. Like, already he was the light heavyweight champ.
What time frame was this?
This would have been in the early 2000s, about 2004, 2005. Let's see. No, before that. This would have been like early 2000s because he joined Ring of Honor in 2002. So this would have been before that. This would have been 99 to 2002.
Okay. So
he's in IWA Mid-South. And also that's where he started working with Chris Hero, who you may all know as Cassius Ohno, when he was a young indie guy, much thinner. And they worked a couple of insane matches. He had a 55-minute Iron Man match and then a 90-minute 2 out of 3 Falls match with Chris Hero while he was in IWA Mid-South. Also, while he was there and the champion, he had matches with and beat Eddie Guerrero, AJ Styles, while he was there. And obviously that's a bit of a feather in the cap for an indie guy.
Of course.
So already he's getting some success at an indie level really, really early in his career.
Especially looking at the careers those guys have had since.
Yeah.
Rest in peace. Ed.
And then an interesting incident happened, and I wanted to bring this up because it informs a lot of later stuff, is that he refused to work for IWA Mid-South. At the time, it was being run by Ian Rotten of the Nasty Boys. And he refused to work for them for a while, and it's kind of been lost to history exactly what happened. Even he doesn't really remember. But what he said happened was he thinks it was because Chris Hero wanted to go work for another company, and Ian Rotten wouldn't let him. And Punk said, "Look, I'm very defensive of my friends. If I feel they've been slighted, if they feel like they've been slighted, even if they don't want to do anything about it, I feel like I have to stand up for them." And so he refused to work for IWA Mid-South for about 11 months, even though Chris Hero was like, "It's fine. It's not a big deal." Punk was like, "No, it is a big deal, man. It is a big deal." And he just didn't work for him for 11 months.
Okay.
So his authority.
What was he doing for 11 months is the question.
Working other places. I mean, he was, working other. He was also in TNA for a minute around then as well. Just after that. So joins Ring of Honor 2002. Starts feuding with Raven. Now, if you remember Raven was fantastic in ECW, but the dude always was, how shall we say this, dabbling in substances.
The hardcore champion.
The dude, like, if you listen to Raven's history, he's one of those guys who never got a reputation outside of the business for being into drugs and alcohol and that stuff, because he was able to work and do a whole bunch of stuff. But he was basically like a vacuum cleaner for hard drugs. He's one of those guys who could just handle it really well, right? But he was absolute, he loved them. He loved them substances.
Yeah.
Which made him perfect for CM Punk to work with, because CM Punk realized, well, my whole thing is being straight edge. We can make this an angle. And so they had this whole angle where he was calling out Raven for being into drugs and whatnot. And it became like kind of this, moral superiority angle. And they had some great matches. And this is, way back in the day, 2003, this was. And then Ring of Honor's very first, remember how recently they brought back the Pure Championship?
Yeah.
And it was all about being a pure technical wrestler.
Yeah.
The very
professional
wrestling. The very first Ring of Honor Pure Championship tournament, AJ Styles won. Second place, CM Punk.
Huh.
So he goes way back and was considered, he was never considered like the best technical guy in the world. He was working at the same time as like Daniel Bryan and Samoa Joe and Nigel McGuinness and guys like that. But he was a guy who understood story, and he was technical enough that he could hang with those guys. So while he was in Ring of Honor, he had these incredible classic matches, and in fact was one of the reasons why Ring of Honor was on the map. He got actually the first 5-star match. The Dave Meltzer rated 5 stars was him versus Samoa Joe, their second match of a 3-match series. The first 2 matches went to a 60-minute time limit draw, and the third one Joe won. But the second match in Ring of Honor, got 5 stars. It was the first time, I think, in 7 years that a match in North America got 5 stars from Dave Meltzer. I think the previous match was Shawn Michaels Undertaker Hell in a Cell. So big accolade. And it became, this is back before internet. This is back before you could easily get your hands on these things. If you wanted to watch Ring of Honor, tape trading, or you had to really work to get their DVDs. So Punk Joe 2 was like one of the most prized DVDs you could get at the time. It was a huge underground buzz for it. It was the top selling Ring of Honor DVD at the time. So it's where both Samoa Joe and Punk came from, is this era.
Yeah.
Like if you're wondering why people still respect them so much, it's stuff like this. It goes back 16 years.
I do remember a match of Samoa Joe, AJ Styles, and Bryan Danielson that I believe was in TNA, but I might be wrong there.
Maybe
like
TNA.
All of those guys, all of the guys that we love now seem to have all, like something was in the water in the early to mid 2000s in the indies.
Oh yeah. For sure. And that's a point we'll get to, is what Punk had to do with that as well. What his role was in that upswing of all that talent at the time, which is now, I mean, all your modern wrestling stars were inspired by that era.
Yeah.
Like all the indie guys of today were inspired by those indie guys. And one of them was CM Punk through the indies. And then when he gets to the mainstream, they were inspired by him in other ways. So we're going to get to all of that. But you mentioned TNA. And I did say that Punk did work for TNA for a second. He did. But while he was there was a bit of an incident. And this is one thing that I thought was interesting as well. You remember Teddy Hart?
Yeah, of course.
Remember the Hart family?
Yeah.
But kind of like the black sheep of the family because he's incredibly talented, but is an absolute mess of a human being.
Yeah.
Like just he's clinically insane. So while Punk is working for TNA, he's also working for TNA, having at this point flunked out of WWE for being a mess. And I guess as the story goes, Teddy Hart bumped Punk coming into a cafe, and Punk goes, "Do we have a problem?" And Teddy goes, "I don't know. Do we have a problem?" And things escalate, and they end up fighting in the parking lot. And Punk apparently just kicks Teddy's ass. Gets him in a knee bar, and that has to be broken up by, of all people, Sabu broke this fight up.
Sabu says you stop fighting, you stop fighting.
You stop damn fighting.
Yeah.
So he breaks it up, and they both get in trouble, but apparently, you know, it was an incident where everyone kind of looked at Punk sideways afterwards, even though he'd never had an issue before like this. He was a guy who had stood up for himself before, but never got into an actual scuffle. And as time went, at the time, it was like, you know, it kind of darkened his time at TNA, and he ended up leaving TNA from having issues with the management as well. But as time has gone on, at the time, they were both blamed, and people wondered, like, does Punk have an attitude? And, you know, obviously Punk has an attitude, but Teddy Hart is insane. And Teddy Hart has had incidents like this all over the place.
Yeah.
So as time has gone on, people have softened on, you know, Punk being involved in this and have been more like, no, it was Punk standing up for himself. So an interesting incident in TNA. And that's one of the more notable things that he did in TNA, which I think should say something. But then he got to try it with WWE.
It's like those guys that always have trouble finds them. I guess like we all know that guy that is always in trouble, even though he might have the best of intentions. It just seems to find him somehow. I don't know. That's what I'm picking up. Is that he might just be he might just always not be looking for it, but it just has a way of finding him. See Teddy Hart.
A little bit of both. Well, yeah, right. And it's to a lesser degree. Yeah. You know, and if you have the attitude of you're waiting for the world to strike out at you, at some point it's going to strike out at you.
Yeah.
And that actually brings me to an incident that he had in OVW, because he got a tryout in WWE and ended up in OVW. And I want to talk about what happened in Ring of Honor.
Teddy Hart did too, if I remember right. He got into the developmental. Didn't he get into OVW? Mid-2000s?
Yeah, he flunked out of WWE though.
Okay, yeah.
You know.
Yeah, he's a mess.
He's a mess. But while CM Punk was in OVW, he actually, you know, someone apparently, he hasn't released the name, but someone apparently big leagued him and gave him a shot to the face that broke his nose and ruptured his eardrum. And this person then had to drive him to the hospital. Oof. And while they're in the car, he was like, oh, okay, I know what this was. This was, hey, welcome to the big times, kid, kind of shot. And he asked the guy, he's like, do we have a problem? And the guy goes, I don't know. Do we have a problem? And Punk goes, we can pull over right now. And the guy goes, no, dude, we're fine. We're fine. We're cool. And Punk's like, all right, just tell me, instead of hitting me in the damn face and sending me to the hospital.
Right.
And apparently they got to the hospital, and the doctor's checking out Punk and is like, we're going to have to wait for your nose to heal and then reset it. And Punk's like, I've broken my nose before. I know how to, like, you can just reset it. And the doctor goes, no, we don't do that. So Punk goes off to the bathroom, resets his nose, comes back out. The guy who punched him is now sitting on the table. He's like, what are you doing here? He's like, well, while you're getting checked out, my leg started feeling weird, and I had the leg checked out. Apparently he ruptured a quad when he punched Punk in the face.
God.
Most, as Punk says, the most expensive punch ever thrown in OVW. Anyway, but before he got to OVW, he was still in Ring of Honor.
Right.
And WWE said, we want to sign you. And so he says, okay, I'm going to go to WWE. It's the big leagues, is where, you know, you're supposed to want to go as a wrestler. Yeah, let's do it. And so people in Ring of Honor, like they have their fingers on the pulse. The dirt sheets are like, oh, Punk's signing with WWE. He makes no bones about it. He's like, yeah, I'm going to go to WWE. But first, I'm going to have this title match with Austin Aries, who's the champ, also a mess, who's also a champ in Ring of Honor, but also an amazing technical wrestler. I'm going to have this title match. Everyone's like, okay, cool. Punk's going to lose this match and blow off and go to, you know, WWE. He beats Austin Aries for the title. So now, at the beginning of the summer of 2005, CM Punk is the champion of Ring of Honor, and everyone knows he's going to WWE.
Whoops.
And he turns heel and goes, yeah, I'm going to WWE. I'm better than all of you suckers. I'm in the big leagues now, and I'm going to take your stupid championship with me. He even signs his real WWE contract on the Ring of Honor title in the middle of the ring. And this was known as the Summer of Punk because it was the hottest angle in wrestling. People were losing their minds. All the indie fans were like, holy shit, is Punk actually going to take the Ring of Honor championship? Is he going to abscond with this championship at the end of the summer? Like, he had the date and everything. He's like, yeah, I'm leaving with this thing.
Can you imagine if that happened today? Like, who's the current Ring of Honor champion right now?
I mean, you talk about the Forbidden Door.
Right.
You know, this is before that. This is actually like when things were not all friendly between companies. It was
Bandito. That's right.
Well, Bandito, yeah. But I'm saying, like, this is back where you had, you know, this is 10 years after Medusa dumped the WWE Women's Championship into a trash can on WCW Nitro, right? This is back when you had to strip Bret Hart of the championship in Montreal because you didn't want him taking your championship to WCW. Like, crazy shit went down in wrestling to keep people from taking championships to other companies because crazy shit happened when you let other people have their hands on your title.
Right.
Right? You remember what happened to the 10 pounds of gold before ECW was formed? Shane Douglas.
Oh, Shane Douglas, yeah.
Shane Douglas took the NWA title because he won it. And he threw it down. And he said it's no longer the NWA championship. Now the only real championship in professional wrestling is Eastern Championship Wrestling, is the ECW belt. He abused the NWA title in order to get his own company over. You had to be really careful about titles. And so this was a big deal. And people got hot about this. CM Punk worked people that entire summer. And everyone's sitting there going, it's a work, right? And they weren't sure. They genuinely didn't know if CM Punk just had this attitude the entire time and they didn't know it. And he was working them and he was going to take this title, which was at the time, Ring of Honor was known as the respectable company. We don't do any of the run-in nonsense. There's always going to be like, we're about the rules. There's rules to wrestling. We're going to follow those rules. You know, it was very much for the hardcore fans who really wanted to see real professional wrestling.
You're right.
Right. So
how does that equate to a quick sidebar? How does that equate to what Kenny's doing or has been doing for the past year, taking titles from other companies and bringing them to AEW?
Well, that's the thing.
Is that frowned upon in the same way?
No, because again, like, things have gotten much more friendly now. Like, we know they're all working together behind the scenes. It's not like he's stealing a title and running away with it and he's never going to come back. You know, we know he's in a working relationship with AAA. We know he's in a working relationship with Impact. We know when the time comes, he'll drop it to a guy who's going to go work with Impact. And Christian's going to drop it at some point to a guy in Impact. Like, it's all working to make...
But I'm saying
NWA is having matches on AEW.
Does it legitimize it because we all know who Kenny Omega is, and we understand that some of those things are a given, but in the time, it wasn't as understood. Whether it was Shane Douglas or whether it was Punk, Kenny's kind of doing the same thing.
Well, Kenny did threaten, like, I'm going to go to Impact, never come back to AEW, and everyone's like, okay, sure, you're not. All right.
Right.
No one believes it, right? It's not the same thing because WWE... especially among the indie fans of the day, was thought of as the big corporate monster.
Yeah.
Which it is. It's a big corporate monster.
Especially after they bought WCW and the invasion and all of that stuff of the early 2000s. And
they're not above absolutely ruining their competition.
Yeah.
They're not above that petty shit. Especially then. WWE was still like very, very, they're trying to be edgy a lot. They would have had no problem bringing out the Ring of Honor World Championship and shitting on it on television. And that would have been...
Vince McMahon could have literally come to the ring and taken a shit on the Ring of Honor Championship. That would have been good TV. And it would have fit in the Ruthless Aggression era, you know?
Yeah, it would have fit. It would have fit in that era. So their fans were legitimately concerned about that. And Punk worked that. And it was a brilliant angle. A brilliant angle. And it's one that he would call back on later, as we'll talk about. But it was a great angle. Got a lot of heat, got a lot of eyes on the product. And ultimately, he did drop the title to James Gibson in a fatal four-way, including Samoa Joe and Christopher Daniels in August 2005, August 14th, 2005. And that was his last show. And right after he lost it, he turned face again for a tearful goodbye, and it was a beautiful moment. And everyone was like, "Oh, thank God." It was a work the entire. It was a work the entire time. But it showed that, and this, along with a lot of stuff Punk had done before, showed that he wasn't above turning on the crowd. He worked incredibly well as a superior, morally superior heel, like this, looking down his nose at everybody. It showed that. It showed that he had a mind for making these kind of groundbreaking, fourth wall breaking angles. And he'd bring that to WWE, but not for a while. He went to WWE for a minute. It was an OVW for a year. Had success in OVW. He was a TV champ. He was the heavyweight champ of OVW while he was there. He was a tag champ with Seth Skyfire. So he had success in OVW. He's had success everywhere he's gone because you can't deny his talent. The guy's got something. The talk ability, the ring ability. There's talent there. He's a very good professional wrestler.
Yes.
He's a very good talent. But we're going to get into like the aspect of this that I think is we're going to talk quite a bit about, which is CM Punk is good, but how good is he? Right? Yeah. He's had success everywhere he's gone. He's had success in OVW. He was then eventually called up to ECW, which was the WWE retread of ECW at that point. At that point, WWE had, stopped playing around and actually just bought ECW and then restarted it on TV, which was awful, with the exception of a couple of pay-per-views, the one-night stands.
The one-night stand.
It was awful.
Yeah.
It was awful. It was nothing like what ECW was before. They brought back some of the old ECW guys, but it was just a pale imitation of what it once was. But Punk caught the eye of Paul Heyman. And Paul would be a guy who was a CM Punk supporter and a big fan of his for the rest of his career, and actually would work with him a lot as well. And in fact, one of the reasons why Paul Heyman left ECW, why he quit WWE, was because for a while there, CM Punk in ECW was undefeated. And he had an undefeated streak for about 6 months and ended up losing to Hardcore Holly, I think. Bob Holly was his first loss. But before that, he was creating so many waves. He was on Team DX, that Survivor Series of that year, of 2006. And he was on a team with Triple H, Shawn Michaels, and both the Hardy Boys. It was them five versus Edge, Randy Orton, Mike Knox, Johnny Nitro or John Morrison now, and Greg Helms, which is Shane Helms doing a different gimmick. So the Hurricane, basically. That was the Survivor Series where no one from Team DX was eliminated, including Punk.
2006.
And that was his 2006. And that was his first look on the main roster was, hey, here's Team DX, the Hardy Boys, Triple H and Shawn Michaels, and this kid from ECW, CM Punk. And this is also back when in ECW, or in OVW and ECW, they told Punk to put on weight because they thought he was too skinny. And it's WWE, you have to have some mass. So if you look at him back then, he's actually kind of like, he's not flabby. He's a little thicker. It's a weird look for him. It's before a lot of his tattoos, so he's just kind of like thick and bare. It's weird. It's a weird look. But it was working for him. As I said, Punk was having success in ECW. So Bobby Lashley was the champion of ECW for a while there, which was just weird. He ended up getting drafted to Raw, so he vacated the ECW championship, which should tell you what they think about the ECW championship at the time. And Punk was Punk won a tournament to be in the finals for the vacated title. And he was going to face a man by the name of Chris Benoit for the title at Vengeance in 2007. But Benoit no-showed. And Benoit no-showed because he was busy killing himself, his wife, and his son in one of the most horrific incidents in wrestling history. So that kind of put a bit of a damper on the whole angle, as you can imagine. Mm-hmm. And they ended up having to redo it, rescript it, so that it was Johnny Nitro or John Morrison versus Punk in the finals. And Morrison would actually win, and then they'd feud all summer, and Punk would eventually win it at the end. So he ended up winning it and then lost it, I think, in January to Chavo Guerrero because Edge interfered. Now, Edge interfering with Punk is actually a thing that we'll get into here. But that December, when Punk was the champ, he wasn't the champ. He was just been the champ, but he was in an Elimination Chamber match to get the championship back. And Paul Heyman quit the company. He quit WWE because of December to Dismember, because Vince came in and said, I want it done this way. And Paul said, I want it done this way. And Vince said, no, I'm doing it this way. Tough shit. And Paul said, okay, F you. And Vince, as an F you to Paul, had his boy CM Punk eliminated first like a bitch in the Elimination Chamber by Rob Van Dam. Punk was actually Vince's way of getting back at Paul Heyman. That's how much of a Paul Heyman dude CM Punk was at the time.
Oof.
But Punk still was able to move upward in the company. He ended up getting drafted to the main roster. He won. He failed the first attempt at Money in the Bank at WrestleMania 23, but 24 was his second attempt, and he won that briefcase and ended up getting back at Edge for costing him the title, because he cashed in on Edge 3 months later when he was drafted to Raw. First thing he did, cash in on Edge. And he held the title for about 69 days. So the CM Punk basically came to the main roster and won the title.
Wow.
So it wasn't like WWE wasn't pushing him. It wasn't like he wasn't getting looks. Like, the dude was successful off the bat. And then he lost it 69 days later in a bizarre angle where he didn't even defend it. He got attacked by Orton backstage and got punted in the head. And then Chris Jericho, for some reason, defended the title for him. It was bizarre. But he didn't technically lose it. But then they were just like, okay, you're done being champion. Go do something else. And he ended up being in a tag team and winning tag championships with Kofi Kingston. It was a weird time.
When he was doing his Jamaican.
Yes, when he was Jamaican Kofi Kingston. But he was just Jafaican. Punk ended up winning the Intercontinental title from William Regal. And Punk ended up becoming the fastest ever Triple Crown winner. The guy who won the 3 big titles in WWE in history at the time. The next year, he won Money in the Bank again.
Damn.
So, obviously, I mean, here's the thing. They pushed him real quick. They saw something in him. And then he cashed it in on Jeff Hardy and had that amazing feud with Jeff Hardy in 2009, where we went back to the Raven angle, right? He did the same thing again. Hardy, you're having all these. That was when Hardy was at his worst, right? He ended up getting fired after this feud that summer, going to TNA and having that awful match with Sting. Wasn't even a match. But Jeff Hardy was a mess at the time, and Punk was like, cool, we're making that an angle. And it's not like that's something that they never did in WWE. They've used substance abuse as angles before. Obviously, Hawk and Jake the Snake, they'd had some really tasteless angles. Jeff, when he came back with Sheamus, remember we crapped all over that?
The bar brawl or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the wreck to the DUI with Elias.
Sure.
Ugh.
This was one of those angles, and you can debate how well it worked at the time. And I look back on it, I'm like, that was a pretty good angle. They worked it well.
Hang on, but credit where credit's due. Jeff stopped getting DUIs in backwoods North Carolina.
Well, yeah.
You know, we have Uber and Lyft now. Stop driving.
Well, there's long distances. Uber and Lyft are expensive. All right. But anyway,
okay.
Once again in WWE now, like Punk had used the straight edge thing before, but never to this level. He was never like pushing at this level, like I'm straight edge and you're a druggie. So he had this great feud with Jeff Hardy all summer over the title, and then after that, Taker, he has a feud with Taker where the first one was like this weird no contest thing. Punk ends up winning, but like there's all this kerfufflery, and then Taker just wrecks him for the rest of the feud.
Yeah.
So here's where he hit his ceiling.
Okay.
He hit the ceiling there. He'd been champ. He had the shot with it, but they were like, cool, but you're not Randy Orton. You're not The Undertaker. This is your ceiling. You're good, but you're a B+ player. Sound familiar?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He then formed the Straight Edge Society because they were like, that Straight Edge thing was great. Let's do that. And this is around the time that Punk was starting to be like, why don't you have stuff for me? Why don't you have TV for me? And he went to Vince and apparently like plopped down this huge Bible-sized stack of papers. He goes, there's my TV for the next 9 months. I don't need your creative to do it for me. There's my creative. And he formed the Straight Edge Society with Luke Gallows of the Good Brothers and Serena Deeb, former NWA Women's Champion, who's now with AEW. I think she's injured right now, but she's one of the best things in AEW. Definitely one of the best women wrestlers in AEW right now. Well, she was in Straight Edge Society. She was actually at the time picked out of the audience, right? She was a plant.
Right.
And they brought her in as a way to show her allegiance to the Straight Edge Society to CM Punk, who was becoming like this kind of like cult figure in this role, in this gimmick. She shaved her head live in the ring. That was a pretty big deal at the time. And it ended up being a pretty good angle. They even had a bit where Punk had a hair versus hair match and was forced to shave his head, and then he ended up wearing like a mask or a lucha mask to hide the fact that he was bald and hide his shame. But ultimately, it was great, and there was a lot of good stuff there, but it just kind of fizzled. Like, obviously, you could tell that management just lost interest in the angle.
Yeah,
it fizzled out. Serena ended up. It's debatable whether or not she got fired for substance abuse or for kayfabe breaking, because apparently she was out partying, and it's not like people didn't party in WWE. They did, but apparently she was photographed having drinks while in the Straight Edge Society angle, and was like she was summarily let go.
Oops.
Joey Mercury got injured. He was also a member. So they were just like, Straight Edge Society's done. And then so they decided to give Punk some time off. He was on commentary for a minute because he had a hip injury. He was great on commentary. They're like, you're really good on commentary. He's like, that's great, but I don't want to be on commentary.
Yeah.
So he did that for a while, and then ended up jumping off of commentary. Remember the Nexus?
Vaguely. Wade Barrett and Heath, no.
It was basically a bunch of OVW guys, a bunch of NXT guys, pre-NXT guys, coming up wrecking the main roster. It could have been one of the greatest invasion angles of all time, but they ran into one John Cena. And John Cena basically beat the Nexus by himself. That's a whole other show, is the debacle that was the booking of the Nexus. So the Nexus basically ran into John Cena and had their legitimacy crushed. And then Punk came along, was like, cool, I'm going to be the leader of the Nexus and try to bring them back some legitimacy. So once again, he was in this role of kind of cult leader.
Yeah.
Right. Follow me. Because granted, he could cut great promos on the mic, act like he was a leader of men, but also very squirrely. It was a role he was great in. But of course, the Nexus was already pretty much dead. And so at this point, he realized that once again, he was in a dead-end angle. And the new Nexus, of course, fell apart as well. Orton pretty much wrecked the whole thing. Punk ended up losing his feud with Orton and ended up actually being tossed out of the Royal Rumble because of Orton. And he's sitting here looking at Orton saying, what's he got that I don't? And ended up not being in WrestleMania, or not having the match he wanted at WrestleMania because of all of this angle. And he's looking at this, and afterwards is put in a feud with John Cena. And he knows what's going to happen here. It's John Cena.
Yeah.
He knows now he can only rise so far in WWE because they're going to slap him down with Orton or Cena or Undertaker or Triple H or someone who's above him. He's a B-plus guy, but he's not meant to be a top guy. And he's sitting here going, I can make you money. I've proven I can make you money. Give me a chance at the top, and I can prove I can make you money. You've been jerking me around for this time. He's getting bitter. He's getting pissed off. And he's finally in a match with John Cena and then feud with John Cena, and he sees which way this is going. And this is where the pipe bomb happens.
I think this is this was 2013?
This would be 2011.
2011. Yeah, this was about the time I was coming back into things. Sheriff McDonald was getting me amped, and I saw that I had access to like the whole back catalog. And no, I think it was, so I went all the way back and started watching, but I didn't start doing it until sometime in 2012. But I went back. They had the catalog all the way back to 2011 of every week's episodes. And I went through and binged everything and just caught up just to make sure that what's happened in the last year? And it took me a good 6 months to get caught up with everything. But I think I started almost right after this. So going back to the Nexus for a second, that was Wade Barrett. Was it Daniel Bryan in there as well?
Initially, but then he, in their initial attack, he ended up choking out Justin Roberts with his own tie. And the network thought that was too extreme for their TV. So WWE fired, quote unquote, Daniel Bryan to make the network feel happy. And Daniel Bryan went and worked the Indies for like a couple of months. And then they just brought him back to be a good guy against the Nexus. Daniel Bryan was an original Nexus guy, but not for very long.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess what I'm getting at is like, I didn't see the pipe bomb live, but it rippled through the internet, and I ended up going back and picking it up.
I'm gonna read the pipe bomb.
Okay.
I'm gonna read the promo because it's important.
All right.
I mean, I could just tell you guys to go watch the damn thing, and you should anyway. But for this show, it is important what he said.
Yeah.
Because at the time, ever since, like, in the wake of Chris Benoit dying 4 years earlier at this point, WWE became very sanitized, very scripted. The PG era, the John Cena era, the Super Cena era, where Cena would, like with the Nexus, you have a whole bunch of up-and-coming talent who could all be, superstars, some of them top guys in the case of Wade Barrett, and Cena basically buried them all in one night. Partly because Cena used to politic like crazy to make sure no one, took his spot. Alex Riley, anybody?
Yeah, right.
But also because that was what Vince wanted as well. He wanted another Hulk Hogan. So there was a big ceiling on WWE. And there was a lot of politics backstage. There was a lot of bullshit. And if there's one thing that we've known about CM Punk for his entire career, it's the guy doesn't put up with bullshit. He doesn't play games. He's a straight shooter. And he reached his breaking point at a certain point. His contract was up about around the time of that year's Money in the Bank. And he didn't make any bones about it. He's like, he says in real life, he was like, I'm probably out of here. Like, I had my shot at WWE. I knew coming in here, I wasn't the kind of guy that they looked for, but man, it was worse than I thought. Oof. I reached a certain level. I believed I could go higher. I believed I could make them more money. I believed I could make myself more money. But they weren't giving me the chance, and they were jerking me around. And I'm done with it. And so he was fighting with people backstage so much, and he even admits like he wasn't the greatest guy to be working with at the time. And he said, look, I'm going to cut a promo. And just let me cut a promo. And I'm going to air my grievances on TV. And Vince said, okay. Which props to Vince. Because as much as everyone wants to give CM Punk credit for all of this, part of it was Vince going with it and rolling with it. And it made one of the most indelible moments and indelible shows in WWE history. So CM Punk comes down on a Monday Night Raw, beats up John Cena, lays him lying in the ring because they're having a feud for the title. And he knows, I'm not winning this title. And, what do I give a shit? So he goes to the top of the ramp and infamously crosses his legs and sits down. And from the top of the ramp, delivers the following promo. He says, John Cena, while you lay there, hopefully as uncomfortable as you can possibly be, I want you to listen to me. I want you to digest this because before I leave in 3 weeks with your WWE Championship, I have a lot of things I want to get off my chest. I don't hate you, John. I don't even dislike you. I do like you. I like you a hell of a lot more than I like most of the people in the back. And I hate this idea that you're the best because you're not. I'm the best. I'm the best in the world. There's one thing you're better at than I am, and that's kissing Vince McMahon's ass. You're as good at kissing Vince McMahon's ass as Hulk Hogan was. I don't know if you're as good as Dwayne, though. He's a pretty good ass kisser. Always was and still is. Whoops. I'm breaking the fourth wall. And he waves to the camera. He says, I'm the best wrestler in the world. He says, I've been the best since day one when I walked into this company, and I've been vilified and hated since that day because Paul Heyman saw something in me that nobody else wanted to admit. That's right. I'm a Paul Heyman guy. You know who else was a Paul Heyman guy? Brock Lesnar. And he's split just like I'm splitting. But the biggest difference between me and Brock is I'm going to leave with the WWE Championship. I've grabbed so many of Vincent K. McMahon's brass rings that it's finally dawned on me that they're just that. They're completely imaginary. The only thing that's real is me and the fact that day in and day out for almost 6 years, I have proved to everybody in the world that I'm the best on this microphone, in that ring, even in commentary. Nobody can touch me. And yet, no matter how many times I prove it, I'm not on your lovely little collector's cups. I'm not on the cover of the program. I'm barely promoted. I don't get to be in movies. I'm certainly not on any crappy show on the USA Network. I'm not on the poster of WrestleMania. I'm not on the signature that's produced at the start of the show. I'm not on Conan O'Brien. I'm not on Jimmy Fallon. But the fact of the matter is, I should be. This isn't sour grapes, but the fact that Dwayne is in the main event at WrestleMania next year and I'm not makes me sick. Oh, hey, let me get something straight. Those of you who are cheering me right now, you are just as big a part of me leaving as anything else. Because you're the ones who are sipping on those collector cups right now. You're the ones that buy those programs that my face isn't on the cover of. And then at 5 a.m. at the airport, you try to shove it in my face and get an autograph and try to sell it on eBay because you're too lazy to get a real job.
Ooh.
I'm leaving with the WWE Championship on July 17th. And hell, who knows? Maybe I'll go defend it in New Japan Pro Wrestling. Maybe I'll go back to Ring of Honor. And he waves at the camera again and goes, hey, Colt Cabana, how you doing? The reason I'm leaving is you people. Because after I'm gone, you're still going to pour money into this company. I'm just a spoke on the wheel. The wheel is going to keep turning, and I understand that. Vince McMahon is going to make money despite himself. He's a millionaire who should be a billionaire. You know why he's not a billionaire? Because he surrounds himself with glad-handed, nonsensical douchebag blank yes men like John Laurinaitis, who's going to tell him everything he wants to hear. And I'd like to think that maybe this company will be better after Vince McMahon is dead. But the fact is, it's going to be taken over by his idiotic daughter and his doofus son-in-law and the rest of his stupid family. Let me tell you a personal story about Vince McMahon, all right? We do this whole anti-bully campaign, and they cut him off. So obviously there's a lot there.
Yeah. We could spend an hour just analyzing the pipe bomb.
Woof.
Yeah.
So I'm behind on my history of CM Punk here. So we do have to run along and get through more stuff. But succinctly speaking, this was when kayfabe was still alive, more or less. So for Punk to absolutely shatter it in this way made everybody sit the hell up. It was like getting an electric prod up your butt when he cut this promo.
It wasn't for me yet. It wasn't until the podcast interview.
Sure. Well, that was a long time later when yeah. But the thing about this was, if you look at it on paper, it's still a wrestling promo.
Yeah.
He's a heel. He calls out the fans. He sets up a match with John Cena. He sets up a future match with The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, right? Who one of his whole things was, I'm in WWE. My big goal here is to main event WrestleMania. That's what I want to do while I'm here. So he's trying to angle himself into the main event of WrestleMania by starting a feud with The Rock, which he ended up getting. He ended up getting a Rock feud out of this. So he's working even while he's apparently breaking the fourth wall. It's one of the most brilliant promos ever cut because it sounds like he's tearing down the company, and he is. There's a whole bunch of reality here, whole bunch of real feelings and real emotions. But he's also still working.
Yep.
And that really galvanized, that woke so many people up. And it took a while. It wasn't overnight. But it definitely woke people up. And it ended up making for this, that WWE, credit where credit's due, they turned the whole ship. And that Money in the Bank, when CM Punk had that match in 3 weeks with John Cena and his contract was up, they promoted it as CM Punk does not have a contract signed on the night of the Money in the Bank. And he and John Cena went out and had the first 5-star match in North America since CM Punk and Samoa Joe at Ring of Honor.
Damn.
It's an amazing match, and I recommend everyone go watch it. It's phenomenal, and it's in Chicago. And that crowd was freaking insane. Insane. And the end of the match was CM Punk beating John Cena clean in the ring after doing some moves you're not allowed to do in WWE. He gave him a pile driver in this match.
Oof.
Which anyone who was a wrestling fan went, oh shit, he doesn't give a damn right now. He's going to do whatever he wants on his way out. Beats John Cena clean, goes to grab the belt. Vince comes running out like it's the Montreal Screwjob and tries to have Alberto Del Rio, who was the Money in the Bank holder at the time, cash in on CM Punk. CM Punk escapes into the crowd with the title and leaves. Oof. And a lot of people at the time were hoping that this would mean he would take it to Ring of Honor, that he would do what he said he was, even if he was still really contracted with WWE, which he was. He signed a contract that night, in reality, not out of kayfabe. But everyone hoped he would keep it and do it. No, he was back in a couple weeks in WWE. Right back into some angles, right back in the same angles. And he ended up feuding with Kevin Nash, and then feuding with Triple H. But he feuded with Kevin Nash, cost him the title, and they gave it right back to Cena. And then he ended up and then Nash just disappeared. He started having a feud with Triple H, and Triple H beat him in the feud. So Punk came back after all this to get punked out. Like, he basically had to eat his crow. He had to suck up to the company and eat the crow of the booking. And then he moved on to John Laurinaitis, who'd also called out. He moved into a feud with him, where he and Laurinaitis was like the authority figure, and he kept trying to getting one up on Laurinaitis, and but he was still a B+ player. But then he ended up winning the WWE title from Alberto Del Rio in November of that year. And he held it for 434 days. And it was a record until 2018 when Brock broke it. Because the fans got so behind him. In that time period, from August to November, the CM Punk chants got louder. The fans got more rabid. And WWE went, let's make him the champ again. Screw it. He's making us money. And in that time, he had feuds with Chris Jericho, with Daniel Bryan, with John Cena, with Ryback, as you mentioned, and with The Rock. And he won all of those feuds except the Rock feud. Because, as we all knew at the time, that was when we were having the John Cena and The Rock 2 WrestleManias in a row. And they had to make that happen again. So Punk wants to be in that match with The Rock versus John Cena, but he has to lose the title to The Rock in a pretty good feud. But he doesn't get to be at WrestleMania in the main event. He wants to be make it a triple threat. Last year we had John Cena, The Rock. Make it a triple threat this year. Make it interesting. Make it with me. And they say, no, you're going to feud with The Undertaker. You'll be a co-main event. And he's like, it's not the co-main event. That's the main event. I'm going to be feuding with The Undertaker. And they're like, yeah, just go for it. He has to turn heel. And this is the infamous one where Paul Bearer had just died.
Yeah.
And Punk, because he's so beloved by the fans, Punk's like, how do I make myself hated by the fans? I know. I'll take the urn, Undertaker's urn, which is filled with Paul Bearer's ashes, and pour it over myself on the ramp. Like he had to be so evil in this feud with The Undertaker. And no one thought he was ending Undertaker's streak. No one wanted him to be heel. So once again, jerked around by WWE. After that WrestleMania, ended up feuding with Heyman all summer, and Heyman's people. He feuded with Brock, had a great match with Brock.
That one I remember, yeah.
He feuded with Ryback, where Ryback infamously broke his ribs and gave him a concussion. He feuded with Curtis Axel, who people forget was a Paul Heyman guy.
Yep.
And then he ended up, like, one of the last big things he did in WWE at this point was he teamed up with Daniel Bryan against the Wyatt family before Daniel Bryan got sucked into the Wyatt family and before WWE realized what Daniel Bryan was. Because as CM Punk was kind of like, he'd hit the ceiling and WWE just kind of like kept pulling out the struts from underneath him. And he was falling down, back down right where they wanted him. The plan was coming to fruition. Like, hey, you get your CM Punk, but now he's going to go back down again. Daniel Bryan was on the rise.
Yeah.
And Daniel Bryan was getting more popular. And Punk ended up feuding with The Authority right at the end there in 2013. Right at the end, 2013, early 2014.
Yeah.
And the last we saw of him was in the Royal Rumble. Kane eliminated him and chokeslammed him through a table. And that night, Punk said, I'm going home. I'm out. No showed his next few dates. The WWE suspended him for 2 weeks. He never came back. And they served him his termination papers on the day of his wedding a couple months later.
Yeah. Which we found out eventually on the Colt Cabana podcast.
Correct. Which is what's next. And I know we're going to a lot of history here.
Yeah. We got to pick it up a little bit. We're at an hour.
Yeah. I know. There's a lot to get through.
Take 30 minutes to go over this.
30 minutes. No, there's a lot here.
There's a lot to cover with
There's a lot to cover.
Phil.
Okay. So after he leaves WWE, acrimoniously, like, was just so pissed, he goes and does the infamous Colt Cabana podcast, which I recommend everyone go listen to.
Yep. If you can still find it.
You can still find it.
Yeah, I think he had to take it down as part of the lawsuit.
He did. You can still find it.
You can still find it.
That's my point. You can find transcripts of it at least.
Yeah.
So Punk, in this, it came out that while he was working for WWE, there was a lot, like, his issues with WWE were multiple. It wasn't just one thing. He was sick as a dog at the end, and he had been sick for a long time. He had an MRSA staph infection, allegedly. It came out later that he was never actually diagnosed with it specifically, but that he was pretty sure that's what it was. He'd had that the last few months of WWE in his back, and he had been told that it was a fatty deposit by WWE, and then he had to go to an actual doctor who said, no, we got to take that out before it kills you. And he said that the extraction of this thing was one of the most painful things he's ever experienced in his life. But WWE was like, no, you can keep working. If he'd basically taken a back bump wrong, it would have ruptured and killed him.
Yeah.
He had the broken ribs that never really healed. His knees were wrecked. He had multiple concussions, including from the final table spot where Kane put him through the table. He was concussed there. And he said that while he was the WWE champ, he basically had the Harley Race mentality, which is, I got to keep working. WWE's counting on me to be the man. I've got to be like John Cena, be the Iron Man that's always out there doing stuff, no matter how beat up I am. And WWE encouraged that because their medical staff was basically like, take some Z-Packs and you'll be fine. And he specifically called out doctors Aman and Maroon, who had been basically pushing meds on him and not really helping him and clearing him when he knew he shouldn't have been cleared. Where their tests were clearing him of concussion. And he was like, dude, I'm concussed. And they're like, just go run the ropes and we'll see if you're concussed. He's like, I've already taken your test. What is running the ropes going to prove? Like, if you think I'm concussed, then don't let me work. They're like, well, you passed our test, so you can work. And he's like, well, what do you... So lots of problems with the medical stuff, and that would come back around because that was the stuff that really got them in trouble for the podcast. Yes. But he also mentioned the business differences. He said he wanted to go out and get sponsorships, but they said no. Vince said no, and then a year later, Brock comes in and has sponsorships.
Jimmy John's all over his trunks.
Yeah, he wanted to walk Chael Sonnen to the ring and was told no, and then a couple months later, Triple H walked Floyd Mayweather to the ring. He's his inconsistent pushes, which I just went over, like how he'd get pushed and then they drop him, pushed and then drop him. He didn't feel like the company got behind him when he was hot. Even though like on paper, he had the big title reign, during the time he always felt like the secondary title in the secondary story. He didn't have to get the WrestleMania main event, even though he was in a co-main event, quote unquote. He was paid less than everybody else who was in the main events. He felt that he was owed more than guys like The Rock, guys like Brock, who came in, did part-time stuff, and left because he was there the full time, right? That's where one of those that sort of story for WWE that complaint came from.
That'll mess you up in any job you're working.
Punk sitting here and saying that, and all the rest of us look at that and go, yeah, that does kind of suck. Why are these guys coming in and getting all the money and the adulation when everyone else is busting their ass on the road? So the theme was of the podcast, well, the WWE is a big corporation that doesn't care about wrestlers. It's creatively stifling. It's unsafe. It's toxic, et cetera, et cetera. And it was galvanizing because everyone who had gotten so behind Punk in the WWE because he was a galvanizing figure, because he was anti-authority, because he was telling us things we all wanted to hear about WWE because we all been frustrated with it. We'd never heard someone in the company say it. Now he was saying it outside of the company with all the shackles off. We went, oh shit, it wasn't kayfabe. That's all real. All that backstage bullshit, all the politicking, all the nonsense, all the jerking around, that's all real. And so that kind of added to the legend of CM Punk, was that he was the anti-authoritarian guy who WWE ground into the dirt. And that actually, funnily enough, kind of informed why Daniel Bryan ended up getting in WrestleMania, was all that fan anger was then transferred over to Batista. Yeah. It was transferred over to Daniel Bryan.
The rebirth of Evolution.
Well, and but that's why, like that year when Batista came out and won that Royal Rumble and not Daniel Bryan and not CM Punk, the crowd went nuclear. And he got so much heat, and they ended up having to change the whole WrestleMania story. It was supposed to be Randy versus Batista. Batista was the returning hero, but he was a part-timer who was coming back to the WrestleMania main event. And you had this guy, Daniel Bryan, who was working his ass off that the crowd loved. That's where Daniel Bryan's push in WrestleMania 30, that's where that came from, was that anger for CM Punk, at least in part.
I would also, just to throw something in real quick, I would also argue that him doing that podcast really set off a chain of events that kind of gave birth to wrestling Twitter, that gave birth to a lot of the wrestling blogs above and beyond Meltzer and his newsletter and things like that. Like the bulk of the stuff that we see today really started on that. It was also kind of that era where Twitter was coming into prominence. Clickbaitiness was coming into prominence, and this, BuzzFeed was all the rage. Like a lot of this stuff was very timely, and I think a lot of it had to do with, oh crap, all the wrestling fans were sitting here. We heard the pipe bomb a few years before. Now we've seen him come out and shoot on this podcast, and now it's every week we get a shoot podcast. We get somebody that's been out of shape or something. It
was certainly the first. It was the first major one of its kind where someone came out of WWE and just was like,
yep,
airing all the shit. And he said at the beginning of the actual podcast is like, look, I don't want to come across as bitter, but I kind of am.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna explain why. But at the same time, like I kind of want to move on from this. But also one of the themes was that WWE took this kid who all he ever wanted to do was professionally wrestle, be a professional wrestler. It's all he ever wanted to be. So he loved the business so much, and it killed his love for the business. those are his exact words. They killed my love for the business because of all of this bullshit that they put me through, right? But between the getting jerked around backstage, getting over-medicated, so medicated he shit his pants in a match. They gave him so many Z-Packs, he shit his pants in a match, infamously. And, and misdiagnosing concussions, and he was just all banged up and hurt and sick. And he was done. And they ended up getting sued. Dr. Oman sued him for $4 million plus punitive. And him and Colt. And it actually was the end of their friendship. At least, I mean, apparently they're cordial now. But there ended up being a whole really ugly money thing with this, where Colt said Punk had said he was going to pay for Colt's legal fees, and then Punk said, no, we were going to split the legal fees. So Colt sued Punk, and Punk sued Colt over the legal fees, and then the whole thing ended up getting dismissed anyway.
Yeah.
But it was very acrimonious. It was very ugly. And then things kept going downhill for Punk. He wanted to go be in UFC. He wanted to be a real fighter. He trained and trained and trained
for like 2 years.
For a long time. He was really training his ass off. Has a match with Mickey Gall, loses in the first round. Just gets destroyed. I mean, it wasn't even a match. He got destroyed in his first UFC match. And at least in his second match against Mike Jackson, he held out for the entire thing. But he got beaten pretty clearly by decision, even though the decision was later overturned. It was now a no contest because Mike Jackson tested positive for weed. But it's at the end of the day, Punk got his ass kicked twice in UFC, and Dana White fired him.
Yeah.
So, and then he tried acting. He was in a horror movie called A Girl on the Third Floor. It was actually pretty good, and Punk is definitely a pretty decent actor. But he basically just putzed around and wrote some comic books. He co-wrote Thor Annual #1, Vertigo Comics Strange Sports Stories #3. He was co-writing the Drax, the Destroyer, the character Batista plays in the Marvel movies. He wrote that ongoing series.
He got to see the
Master Kung Fu
Blackhawks win the Stanley Cup one year in Chicago.
My God. That's one of the rare times his Twitter blew up.
Yep.
And then he came back for WWE Backstage, which was very controversial, but because people were like, you said you'd never work for WWE again, all this bullshit.
I work for Fox.
Exactly. That's what he was saying. It's like, I was taking Fox's money, and I got the chance to kind of ease my toes back in the water after all this time and all this healing and see if I really wanted to be involved in wrestling again in any way. And apparently that's where he met Renee Paquette, John Moxley's wife, who he now credits as being one of the reasons why he got his love for wrestling back. Was because of her and the conversations that they had on Backstage and outside of Backstage. And he actually did a very nice podcast with her recently, which I also recommend, because if you contrast that with the Colt Cabana one, you can see 7 years worth of healing happen.
Yeah.
In just 3 hours worth of listening to a podcast. Like, he went and got his head straight. He had to go take a bunch of L's, go live life, essentially, like get some stuff off his back.
I had to do that myself. That was one of the reasons when we started this show, I was on sabbatical because my life had become so toxic around work that I just gave the whole industry a big FU and walked away.
Yeah.
And I planned for 6 months. It turned into 2 years. Orbital Jigsaw, BWO was born, and like here we are. So, and of course I'm back in tech. But for you younger folks that are in the chat or might be listening to this down the road, there's something you get in older age, and it's wisdom. And it's you get less
not guaranteed.
Not guaranteed, but you get less reactive, and you kind of think things through a little bit more, and you don't care about shit that you cared about 20 years ago. And it's just, it's interesting how things change. As I approach my mid 40s here, I'm getting to this point where it's like, let
it go. He's our age. Punk is our age.
Yeah. He's 1 year older than me. Almost exactly.
And the thing, and like, it's funny because you see when he was in WWE, he was right in that time frame where this shit would get under your, it would just piss you off.
Oh God. Yes.
And a lot of the promos he was cutting, especially after the pipe bomb, when they really were like, you know what? People love it when you just go off on the mic, so go at it. He was taking shots at Vince McMahon to his face in the ring. He was taking shots at Triple H to his face in the ring. They let him go off, and the fans loved it.
Lapped it up.
Ate it up. ate it up. He was the voice of the voiceless, quote unquote. He was there to tell Vince and Triple H to their faces what the fans thought of them in front of the fans, and the fans were sitting there going, "Oh my God, he actually said it to them. Something I've always thought. Holy shit." That was his power.
His connection. Yeah.
His connection. Yeah. Couple more trivia things. The Pepsi tattoo. You know what that is?
No idea.
So he got it. It was one of his first tattoos, and everyone's always kind of made fun of him for it. But it's interesting. So he drinks. He's a Pepsi guy. He drinks Pepsi. Obviously, he's a fan of Pepsi. Do you ever heard of the band Minor Threat?
No.
Okay, it's punk. You don't listen to punk.
No.
Great band. Their guitarist Brian Baker has a Coca-Cola tattoo. And one time when he was asked, "Why do you have a Coca-Cola tattoo?" he just went, "I love Coca-Cola." And so Punk got the Pepsi tattoo because he loved that idea of like, fuck you. It's just what it is. I like Pepsi.
So I should
But
get
he
a
also-
Diet Coke tattoo?
Well, no, because Punk also got it because I drink Pepsi, not alcohol. It's another straight edge thing, right?
Gotcha.
Sort of subtly. He's married to AJ Lee, as you may have known. April Mendez. He called her out on AEW recently. She was a WW. She was like one of the WWE divas who shouldn't have been a diva. She was the woman's evolution before the woman's evolution.
Fair.
And when he got fired, she got treated like shit. WWE buried her.
With
bad.
Paige.
And
Yep.
Oh, buried her. She went from being the champ to being buried in the matter of like a couple of months. It was really ugly and really petty and shitty.
They had her
And so
lose to Paige on Paige's debut.
and,
if I remember right.
Like bitched her out too. Like got squashed. Like you think what happened to Becky and Bianca sucked? Pfft, go back and look at the last few matches of AJ Lee. But he's still married to her. He's a huge comic book fan. Obviously, he wrote comic books. He said Preacher is his favorite, like probably his favorite comic book. Which, if you haven't read Preacher, if you've only seen the show, go read Preacher. It's insane, very un-PC. He's also one of the only wrestlers to maintain his indie name, and that's a big deal. Something I want to come back to in a second. Is that he was one of the few and first guys to keep the name from the indies onto the main roster, and also maintain control over it after he left. So, Nick, obviously we wanted to get to this a while ago, but we had to get through a lot of history. But let's talk about what's important about CM Punk. Why people care about him. And one of the reasons I think is because he opened the door to indie guys in WWE. He was one of the first indie guy successes in WWE. You wouldn't have had your Daniel Bryans. Daniel Bryan came on after CM Punk. You wouldn't have had your Daniel Bryans. You wouldn't have had your AJ Styles. You wouldn't have had your modern NXTs. Because not only did he inspire WWE to hire more guys that were his size that could talk the way that he talked, and had success the way that he did. I mean, yeah, you had your other guys that were in the cruiserweight division at the time, but no one had success in a major level and a heavyweight level like CM Punk.
Yeah. But I think from a promotional level, that's his influence and his recognizing that there's more talent out there. But I don't know that the fans give a shit about the fact that he's the gateway of all this indie talent that came to WWE.
Because, well, no, if you think about, I like CM Punk, who else is like CM Punk? You look around and see who else feels like CM Punk.
Yeah.
Now you see Daniel Bryan standing right there. You go, he feels like CM Punk.
Yeah.
You got that same kind of indie vibe to him, as Miz would call it, the bingo hall feeling.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. Like that makes other people more successful in his wake. Like we said, would Daniel Bryan have had WrestleMania 30 without CM Punk? I think part of the reason that he's important is that anti-establishment attitude. I think that one of the things that he showed was WWE was like they let him be the anti-establishment guy. And that's one thing that you got to credit WWE with, was they know what money smells like.
Yeah.
And they know an angle that they can make money on. And as many times as they've just blown money and thrown away money, like Punk said famously, my favorite line of the whole pipe bomb, Vince McMahon is a millionaire who should be a billionaire. And it's true. He does so many dumb things to shoot himself in the foot. But at the same time, you can't deny the fact that when he saw CM Punk blow up the way he did, when he saw Daniel Bryan, when he saw the opportunity, he took it in those instances. And he capitalized on CM Punk being anti-establishment. But that's what the fans loved. And so Vince saw that and said, I'm going to make money off of that. And CM Punk saw that and said, I'm going to make money off of that too. So part of it was a work, part of it was real, but that connection that the fans had, Nick, this actually brings me back to a point. This is kind of a big thing I want to talk about at the end here. You just mentioned our age. and the age of a lot of wrestling fans who fell in love with CM Punk at the time. Mid-30s, maybe not old enough to have let things go yet, pissed, remembering the era of WWE that they loved, wondering where it had went, wondering what was going on. We're not the same kids who like the superheroes, who like the smack talk and rock, who like Stone Cold kicking dudes in the guts, or like really young kids who liked Hulk Hogan's and the big buff superhero guys. But we're watching WWE and we still get it. We get the John Cena's, the Randy Ortons, right?
Yep.
And here comes this guy who looks a lot like us, who's saying things that we're thinking and expressing the frustrations that we have with this product. That's absolutely going to connect.
Oh, totally.
And that's one reason why he connected so hard with the audience. He was one of us. And he said that in the promo that he gave when he came back on AEW recently, when he returned, when he had that big return in Chicago, and his music hit. And that was the music he had at the end of WWE, because they licensed, back when they licensed music, they licensed Cult of Personality. They don't own it. So AEW was able to license it too. That audience blew up, and Punk came out. One of the things he said, "I'm one of you." He knows it. He knows where his bread is buttered. But it's also true. And that's, Punk is a performer. He's going to go out there and give us what we want. But he's smart enough to know what role he fills. It's why he so often plays these evil messiah characters, these cult leader characters.
Okay, you just said something interesting, and let's pivot.
Sure.
He knows what role he fills.
Yes.
Let's fast forward to current times.
Okay.
What role is CM Punk filling in modern wrestling 7 years after the last time he did it, coming back in AEW that is stacked with talent, new and old, who probably doesn't need a CM Punk right now.
Well,
but they're
that's
certainly
really,
not going to pass up the opportunity of having the flash in the pan moment of a returning CM Punk.
Here's the thing.
Them being the company that's going to get that opportunity.
You're kind of jumping ahead of where I wanted to go, but that's fine because I can fill in the bricks behind us really quickly and easily. And that is, CM Punk inspired this whole generation of wrestlers. Your Adam Cole's, your Seth Rollins's. Seth Rollins said he wouldn't even be a wrestler if it wasn't for CM Punk, right? You've got a whole generation of indie guys who are smaller, who can kill it on the stick, who looked at CM Punk and said, "That's my guy. That's who I want to be like." Right? So what role does CM Punk fill? I don't know if he's still going to be the edgy, anti-authority guy. I don't know if he can be in AEW. He doesn't have an authority to fight against.
No.
Right?
Tony Khan's probably there. Yeah, whatever you want.
Whatever. Tony Khan has said, "I'm giving him whatever he wants."
Yeah.
They
did talk about that in the press conference, if I remember
He
right.
did. So Tony was like, "Dude, Punk, if something ever doesn't make sense to you here, tell me."
Yeah.
Because that's all Punk was saying about WWE. This doesn't make sense. This doesn't make sense. Tony's saying, if you hear that here, tell me. If you feel that here, tell me, and we'll fix it.
Yeah.
So that's really the question is, what does CM Punk mean now? He inspired all these guys because of his anti-establishment attitude, the fact that he was a straight shooter, the fact that he was a guy who would go out and speak truth to power, and it's something that we all wanted to say, and we could see ourselves in him. And it was a huge watershed because nothing like that had ever happened in wrestling before. He was doing these revolutionary angles where he would pretend to steal titles, or have these cults and everything, and or be this the straight edge guy versus the druggy guy. Like, he had all of these angles that at the time were revolutionary, and they made tons of money and they were very galvanizing. But he can't do that again. You can't do that in AEW, can he? But where is the opponent for CM Punk? And that's actually bringing me to another question here, and kind of a big question. I want to hold on for 1 second because I do want to say a positive before I get to this potential negative. CM Punk said he came back to work with these young wrestlers. He said, "I quit professional wrestling when I left Ring of Honor August 14th, 2005. I came back to it 7 years later, August 20th, 2021, basically saying that my entire time in WWE wasn't professional wrestling. It was something else." Right? Which, yeah, he was in sports entertainment. So a lot of people took that as a shot, and it was, because it's CM Punk, but it also had a double meaning. He wants to come back and do the kind of wrestling that he did in Ring of Honor that was so acclaimed, that set the groundwork for a decade and a half of indie wrestlers, that set the groundwork for a decade and a half of talent who looked at him and took his blueprint and ran with it. And now, older, wiser, calmer, he can come in and give back, wrestling-wise. That to me says, I'm not here to cut CM Punk promos and pipe bombs and try to tear stuff down. I'm here to make professional wrestling, specifically, better. And so that's a big positive to me. His head's screwed on straight. He's not as pissed anymore. He's not out here trying to break everything and tear it down. He's out here to make good things. He's out here to make the future better for all of these professional wrestlers, these up-and-coming guys, these Darby Allins, these Jungle Boys, right? He's here to make them better so that the future of professional wrestling is better. And that to me seems like a much more positive creative endeavor than I'm going to come out and tear down the establishment. And that leads me to my last question here, Nick, or my last big question. There might be a couple more that we natter about, but CM Punk has always been the guy who tears stuff down. It's his nature. Mm-hmm. And it's one of the things that people loved about him. And he's already saying, are you bored of me yet? And I wonder if people will bore of him if he's not out there goosing people with a well-timed quip at WWE or taking the piss out of somebody who deserves it. Is in this era now, like, things have always been fairly tribal with wrestling in general. Like, you and I lived through the Monday Night Wars.
Yeah.
Like, that shit was tribal.
Yep.
But the outlets weren't there. You just talk shit to people over the water cooler or on the playground or whatever. You didn't get online and dox them and threaten their families and all this other stuff that's happening, like all this horrible toxic vitriol that's going on right now. Is Punk potentially a divider, not a uniter? Is he going to be the guy who goes out there and shits on WWE and gets everyone all frothing up again? Is that a danger?
I think that's already happening.
And that's what I wonder.
It's not, him returning is not doing that. It's like when you have a certain someone get elected president, it allows that to be exposed and okay. That kind of behavior that they're associated with. It's when it allows it to become okay. Now, don't think that the toxicity goes away because Punk went away or the tribalism went away after the Monday Night Wars. It was still there, but it took certain events taking place to allow it to be accepted.
Punk was a big flaming log on the fire.
Punk coming back to AEW signals it's okay to AEW everything, WWE sucks.
And that's the thing. That's a symbol that he is. He is an anti-WWE symbol because of a lot of his work in WWE and that podcast afterwards.
Yeah.
He was a lightning rod for anti-WWE sentiment. So him coming back is inarguably a big deal. A lot of time there, no one thought he was coming back. There was all of these CM Punk chants, which were always symbols of "we hate your booking, WWE," or "you screwed over CM Punk," or this. It was that fan anger was always what that meant. Was just like, kind of screw you, WWE.
But it was always there. Him being back is sort of a figurehead of a movement of sorts that allows it to be okay.
That's my point, is that it never went away, but now that the lightning rod is back, is he going to drum that up even more? Or is he going to show that he can do something else besides being a lightning rod for anti-WWE sentiment? Will he be able to
or an anti-authority figure in general? Like, you said you wanted to come back to do professional wrestling because you haven't done it since you left in 2005 at Ring of Honor.
Right.
Are you just going to come in and have professional wrestling matches and feuds? I'd like to see that. I'd really like to see that.
I personally believe, like, there are people that blew off him coming back, like, it's not that big of a deal. I vehemently disagree. No matter how you slice it, CM Punk coming back is a big deal. Now, is it a positive big deal or a negative big deal? That remains to be seen. It could easily go either way, and it's completely up to CM Punk and what he wants to do, as it always has been. The guy definitely, he steers his own ship. Credit where credit's due, and that's one of the things people love about him, is he doesn't give a shit what anyone else thinks. He's going to do what he wants to do. And he's unapologetic. He didn't even like what he said in his speech when he came back. He said, if anyone's got any problem with anything that I've done in the last 7 years, well, he didn't say I'm sorry. He said, yep. Just know I'm back, and that's about it.
Okay.
He's not apologetic.
So I want to talk about, as we wrap this up here, I want to talk about where things go from here. We've got a couple of forks in the road, I think, from my viewpoint.
Yes, agreed.
One, and the one that I'm scared to say as a hot take, I think it might just be a flash in the pan. Because where do we go from here with Punk? You know who should be really scared right now? Hangman Adam Page.
No.
Hang on. Hear me out.
Oh, boy.
Punk needs an opponent.
Yeah.
He needs somebody to go after. He needs an organization to go after. To Kenny Omega and Callis and the Elite and everything they stand for should be everything that Punk is against.
He was asked last night who his dream match is in AEW, and he said the Young Bucks. And he says, I'm going to need a partner for that, but what is it? Is it Saturday now? Why don't we hold on that? And if you know what he's saying, as I think you do, Nick. So I think there are definitely few. Yes. I think that there's a lot of avenues for Punk to be a positive force in AEW. I mean, he basically is the godfather of AEW. If it weren't for him, I argue, if it weren't for CM Punk and guys like him, but him in large part, there would be no AEW because that indie style wouldn't exist.
That's
he
meta.
He's one of the godfathers. Like, if it wasn't for him, you wouldn't have that indie style that became huge in the early 2010s. All the people that were galvanized by CM Punk in the indies in the 2010s, none of them have careers. If not for him, you don't have AEW in a long sense, like the domino effect. Little domino, big domino, right?
I'd have to
Little
process
domino.
that one, but I mean...
It's a butterfly effect.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Without CM Punk, you don't have AEW. He's the godfather, and he's the godfather of that kind of style, and he's in there now to give back. Supposedly.
I definitely see a lot of CM Punk and Cody Rhodes. Influence.
Influence. Cody's very old school.
But Cody's grown up in the business. He's the son of a plumber. So I understand.
See it. No, you brought up Hangman Page.
Okay.
Look at Page's huge, crazy angle that he's in right now.
Yep.
That reminds me of CM Punk.
Sure.
Except for the drinking.
The reason I said the person that should be scared is Hangman Page is because they've invested 2+ years into this whole angle with Kenny Omega. Punk comes back. Now Punk's the hot commodity. Does Hangman Page become the fall guy here after 2+ years of this booking this angle to go ultimately have a redemption to take the title off of Kenny that we know is coming at some point?
I don't think Punk's going to get in the way of that. What I think is that Punk is going to spend 2 years having dream matches and then turn heel and shit on all the fans. And we're all going to love it. We're going to eat it up because he's a great heel. That's my hope. And again, I want to be positive about CM Punk coming back. Regardless of how you look at it, it is a seismic change because he is such a lightning rod, because he's so galvanized, and because he's so popular. There's no way to look at this and not say it's a big deal.
Yeah.
He's a big deal in wrestling. He created fundamental changes in wrestling from the inside, despite wrestling and wrestling, but I mean WWE specifically, but also in the indie scene. But in WWE, even though they didn't want to, he created change in WWE. He said in his interview with Colt, "I changed wrestling from my couch. Just by being home and letting things happen, he's changing stuff." Right? He is a force for change and movement in wrestling. And if you don't agree with that, you're not paying attention.
Yeah.
You're really not. So him coming back is inarguably a big deal. And the
seismic.
only thing,
absolutely,
it's seismic. The only thing that is left to be determined is, will it be for the better or worse, or will it be both? Will this escalate a new wrestling war? Will it make people more tribal? Will it make people more defensive of their wrestling? And also, will it make wrestling better?
I've seen examples of that happening long before it was rumored that he was going to come and join AEW.
Sure. And just to drive home the point of how important this moment is, can you think of anyone else who could come out of retirement and have us saying that?
No. The Rock.
back to wrestling.
Full time. Maybe.
Not the lightning rod stuff, but definitely in terms of
I'm talking about to another company besides WWE.
Driving interest.
If The Rock shows up on AEW, it's all the news.
It proves Punk's point though about how he should have been rated higher. Like he's like, dude, I just want to be given what I'm worth. Man, just having an idea, like, is it arrogant? Yes. Is Punk a prickly dude and not everyone likes him and he's kind of a dick? Yes. Is he also very, I think, realistic and can also be a really awesome dude? Yes. He's human. He's not a superhero. He's not a John Cena. He's not this, cartoon cutout Saturday morning, bright neon shiny thing. He's one of us, warts and all. He just happens to be one of us who can cut sick promos on the mic and then go out there and look like he's kicking ass in a ring. And that's why people love him. And that's why it's important that he's coming back, is because of what he symbolizes in wrestling. It's because of what he can do and what he can create in wrestling. And hopefully it is a force for creation and not destruction, because he has the power to do both. Hopefully this is the beginning of a new golden era in wrestling. We've already been saying it's been a golden era for the last few years. It could become even more golden. If he shows up in AEW, which he has, if Daniel Bryan shows up in AEW, which looks like it's a lock for Sunday,
Bray Wyatt.
If Bray Wyatt shows up, if Adam Page shows up, those are
Adam
all
Cole,
guys. Adam Cole, thank you. Adam Page is already there. If Adam Cole shows up, these are all guys who, Daniel Bryan obviously would be the other godfather. If there was a couple of godfathers of AEW, Daniel Bryan is by God the other one.
Yeah.
AJ Styles would be the third. But Daniel Bryan, like being that absolutely makes for such an incredible potential.
Yes, but let's fantasy book ahead. What do you do with Punk?
I just
46 years old. Like, what do you do? Do you have him in title feuds? Does he end up working in the back as a trainer? What do you do with the guy?
He was the first ever trainer for Ring of Honor.
Sure, I get that.
He loves. He
teaching. Was 20 years old. I get it.
But he said, I love to teach. He loved to do that. He said that was the best time of his life. He's going to come back and be like, wait, I get to teach all these young kids who have this incredible passion for wrestling. I get to do that again? That's kind of a redemption story in my book. You get to come back and give back instead of spit all the vitriol that you were, all this anger and hate that made you sick.
I think I said this the night that he returned, and I want to make sure I drive this point home before we get out of here. One of the things Punk said in his opening promo the night he debuted on AEW was that I'm excited to work with all of this young talent in the back. And the comment that I made was, that wasn't for us, that wasn't for the fans. That was the Punk signal. That was the bat signal to everybody, all of the other superstars and wrestlers in the business. Come work here. It's where all the talent is. And I think if Punk accomplishes nothing else, if he's able to help Tony and Cody and everybody fill up the roster with all of the hot talent coming up, and by having Punk there and sending that bat signal out, and over the next 6 months we see him working with Darby Allin and Miro and all of these other young up-and-comers that are there, like, holy smokes. Like, if they start really getting the jump on WWE for the talent pool, now we're seeing WWE rebrand NXT into something that's supposed to be a little more developmental so that they can start creating people in their own, image. Like, those two things happening in parallel is not lost on me. And Punk sending out that signal was the biggest part of his promo, in my opinion.
He had a bunch of things. That AEW promo was, I think, one that will be studied for a while. And it was off the cuff, unsurprisingly. And he's had a couple now where I kind of look at that and go, trying to pick what's on his mind.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I'm going to leave it on one thing, Nick. We're going to get out of here. I think we've had a great discussion about CM Punk, and hopefully it educated everyone on who he is, why you should care.
It's going to be interesting to see how he wrestles again tomorrow night.
Everything's going to be interesting going forward with this. Again, how can he wrestle? Can he hang with the kids? Is he there to teach kids and create? Is he there to tear down WWE and destroy? But at the end of the day, if I want to look at this positively, and the thing I hope for the most, Nick, is that CM Punk goes and has great matches in AEW, that he gives back creatively, and we see a whole bunch of amazing creative stuff in AEW, incredible moments, incredible matches, and that at the end of the day, the fan reaction to that, even if we have all this toxic tribalism going on, is that what I hope is that once again CM Punk fundamentally changes the landscape of professional wrestling and sports entertainment, and what happens in AEW forces WWE to look at themselves and say, why do we have this kind of oppositional stance with our fans? Why are we always fighting our fans?
Yeah.
And I want this to be something where they go, maybe we should listen to our fans more. Maybe we should, give them more of what they want and less of what we think they want. Because that's been the WWE mentality for so long. And I'm being very pie in the sky about this. I know it's kind of naive to say, but sometimes WWE will do things not reflexively and defensively, not because they think it's the right thing to do, but because they think that they have to do it.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that that's what this becomes, where WWE is forced to change to deal with AEW becoming more, well, not resurgent, but surgent, whatever. AEW getting more on the radar, much like in the 90s, WWE is going to have to change and become better in order to deal with that. And that's the only thing I can hope. I'm being as positive as possible. That's what I hope happens. And I really do also hope that everyone looks at this and says, this is just a way to get more good wrestling TV.
Totally.
Even unless Punk's out there just taking complete broadside shots at WWE, in which case I'm like, oh, well, I guess we're doing this. It's the wrestling wars again. Here we go. So wait and see, Nick. Wait and see. But my goodness.
Vince is going to have to buy another wrestling company.
Hey, Tony, how much do you want for your business? Well, everyone, I hope you enjoyed that talking about CM Punk's history, who he is, why he is, and what the potential future is for him and the wrestling landscape as a whole, because he is a massive figure on it. If you liked it, let us know in the Facebook discussion group. Let's start a conversation over there about all of this. If you have any other thoughts, any feelings, anything that we left out, throw it over there. Let us know what we missed. Obviously, we we got a lot in it, and I still had a bunch of notes I skipped over because we had to get through everything.
I feel like this is one of those topics that we could revisit a year from now and be like, how did it go?
Yeah,
and,
right.
I mean, I'm looking forward. Yeah. It could be one of those things that we come back to and go, where's
State of the Punk Part 2?
Exactly.
I would love to do that.
Exactly.
2 years from now. Well, we made some predictions.
Yeah.
So the State of the Punk Part 2. Come back in 2 years to talk about it.
We'll
Jesse O'Connor popped back in the chat. Hello. She's at 200 bits. Thank you very much. She said, thank you, guys. This was so much fun to me as a rookie. I see so much of what people think of someone now, and I lose how a person came up, and you guys just laid it out for a guy that I didn't know that much about. Thank you both for everything you do. Thank you, Jesse.
Thank you,
for
Jesse.
everything that you do.
That was the
really
whole
appreciate
point.
It. DJ Tin Man with 100 bits. Thank you, brother. He says, thank you, guys. That was awesome. You guys are awesome. Thank you for tuning into the show. Thank you for supporting us, helping out this show.
Abe threw in 1,000 bits earlier, and I missed it. 1,000 bits!
Abe
said,
damn.
Love wrestling history. Love it even more when coming from Mr. Dangerous. Thank you guys for taking time for this today.
Cheers.
Yes.
My pleasure.
We meant to do it on Thursday, but we had a little bit of an emergency with a pup. So
I could have done this I could have gone for hours.
Yeah, this is one of those topics that, like, wrestling history, I think fascinates both of us, and it's one of those things that
pipe bomb, and I'm like, shit, I have a long way to go. Yeah. I could have gone into some of the feuds he had were fascinating how they actually like played out, where you kind of, because again, I can only really say he had this feud and he didn't feel like a big deal afterwards. And like, the Undertaker feud's one that he had after the first reign, where it was just, in hindsight, you look at it and go, man, they really didn't get behind him there. And I can only tell you that I can't really describe how, because we only have so much time. But again, go back and check out some of these matches, some of these feuds. They're worth looking at. It's interesting to see his evolution. Hopefully this gave you guys some things to go look for, some matches to go look for, some history to check out, and also a better idea of why people are so fired up about CM Punk coming back, because it's like I said, it's a big deal. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. As always, let's linktree.com/BWO.
Yeah, these are patrons. They know where it's at. Absolutely check it out.
I'm going to reiterate it anyways. Linktree.com/BWO. Tell your family, tell your friends about it, because the more people listen to our show, the more fun things like this that we can do.
Indeed.
That's how it works. So tell everybody, to get everyone going on this show so that we can get even more fun stuff up here for you guys. But thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, guys.
We really appreciate it, y'all.
But until next time, my name is Nick Howell. You can find me on Twitter at Data Center Dude.
And I am Sir Ian Dangerous. You can find me on Twitter at Sir Ian Dangerous.
But by God!
But somebody stop the damn match!
This show is part of the Orbital Jigsaw Network. For more episodes, subscribe to us on iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher Radio. For details and show notes from each episode, check us out, orbitaljigsaw.com.